Why analog? In a world where modern software synthesizers give you seemingly unlimited polyphony and modulation sources, why would you spend 5 times as much on something with such limited capability? In fact, a large majority of analog synthesizers that you find in the market, especially ones in your price range, can probably only play one note at a time. So I'm going to be using the Korg MS-20 Mini. Before we dive into that, we have to talk about software synthesizers. When using something like Serum, you're getting perfect waveforms that play the exact same every time. Well, this might sound like a good thing. This type of perfection can actually sound boring. So often, much of your time in sound design is spent making things sound less perfect and less consistent. Sometimes this perfection is desired, but often if you don't add imperfections, your music will sound stale and lifeless. The trade-off here, of course, is that software is cheaper, more portable, and more flexible. If you look at something like the Korg MS-20 or any hardware analog synthesizer, the synth is made up of physical circuits and components, and every component is a tolerance and susceptibility to environmental conditions. This means that every note is slightly different, your tone will change with the temperature, and the instrument ages over time. It's almost like the synth is alive. Companies have started to incorporate this imperfection into their models, which leads to plugins like Yuhi's Diva that model voice selection and drift. Analog filters are modeled and turned into algorithms that mimic the frequency response and resonance characteristics of the sound. And tolerances are even added to the calculations. Over time, I'm sure we'll see these analog models get closer and closer to reality, and while they're already quite incredible, they aren't perfect at this time. Take a listen to how the oscillators sound in this example. Tiny tuning differences between the two oscillators create a thicker sound, and imperfections in the waveforms add variety, even if you can't hear it. In soft synths, you can add voice detuning, but it won't have the same effect. Now take a listen to how this filter sounds when the resonance is cranked up. It doesn't just create a ring effect, but it saturates or distorts the sound. An entire secondary effect of analog synthesizers that we haven't talked about yet. In something like Serum, you can control every little detail of the sound and go crazy with modulation sources. With most analog gear, you're fairly limited in controls of modulation, which forces you to be creative to create the sounds you want. This apparent downside of analog gear is also one of its greatest strengths, because in any kind of creative endeavor, the last thing you want is decision fatigue. So to answer the question this video asks of why analog, you have to have respect for these imperfections. Imperfections in the oscillators, imperfections in the filters, imperfections everywhere else, and limitations in control. So you don't need analog synthesizers or expensive gear to make great music, but hopefully now you have an understanding of why you would consider an analog synthesizer in the first place. So I'd love to know what you think about this topic. Do you have an analog synthesizer? Do you want one? Let me know in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and I upload videos every single Tuesday and Friday. See you in the next one.